Welcome to the Holy Post. Hey everyone, before we get started, a quick word. Since it's Christmas break, we're taking a brief pause from our usual format, but we still wanted to share something timely and worth your attention. So today we're releasing an episode of the Skye Pod that I recorded with Kaitlyn Chess back in September, where we take on one of the most common criticisms we hear, Both-Sidesism. In this episode, we talk about what the term actually means, the way we may be guilty of it, and why naming the flaws on both sides of the political aisle is not moral cowardice, but a necessary part of Christian discernment. If you enjoy this episode, you can sign up for HOLYPOST Plus to get full access to the Skye Pod, along with getting schooled with Kaitlyn Chess, advice-ish, bonus interviews, and a whole lot more. Use the code SKYE, that's S-K-Y-E, for 30% off your subscription. Happy New Year, and we'll be back with a new HOLYPOST episode next week. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Skye Pod. I'm Skye Jitani. Joining me for this somewhat special episode are my HOLYPOST colleagues. Kaitlyn Chess is here. Hi, Kaitlyn.
Hi, Skye.
And our producer, Mike Strelo.
Hey, Skye.
Stalo Strelo.
That's me.
So we are going to tackle something that has been on our agenda for a while, and it's unfortunately only become more prevalent in recent weeks with the assassination of Charlie Kirk. But we get frequent messages from our listeners to mostly the main show, sometimes annoyed or upset with us because they accuse us, and let's be honest, I get accused of it more than anybody.
Yeah.
Accusing us and me of both-sidism.
Mm-hmm.
So we thought it would be worth having a conversation of addressing some of those comments that have come in, talking about where we may be guilty of this, where we don't think we're guilty of this, why we approach topics the way we do, and just bring some clarity to...
Mm-hmm.
Now, should we define both-sidism before we get started?
Probably.
I feel like that's part of the challenge is like some of the criticisms we have gotten, I think, are wrongly defining both-sidism.
Yeah,
but I hope that we can come to like there is a form of this that is worthy of being critiqued that I think we could have a good definition of.
Can we start off with just what I think, maybe there's more, two false understandings of both-sidism,
Mm-hmm.
okay? Sometimes I think people conflate both-sidism, is it sidesism or sideism?
Sidism, I think.
Both-sidesism.
Both-sidesism.
Yeah. Okay. I think some people conflate both-sidesism with whataboutism.
Yes.
Okay. So sometimes an argument will be a political group, whatever, is doing X, Y, or Z, and people defend it by saying, well, what about?
Mm-hmm.
And then they talk about what the other side is doing that's either similar or worse or whatever. We are not talking about both sides. I mean, both-sidesism is not whataboutism, because whataboutism is essentially a way of deflating or defending or minimizing whatever your side may be guilty of.
Yeah.
Okay. That's one, I think, false definition. The other one, and this is going to come up a lot in our conversation, both-sidesism is not the same as equivalence.
Yeah.
Just because you're acknowledging that an error may exist or a violation may exist on both the Democratic left and the Republican right does not mean they are in equal proportion. And I think a lot of the criticism we get are people assuming we're making an equivalency argument when we are not.
I mean, that's the rub right there. I think most people who are aware of both-sidesism sees it as a bad thing because it is trying to equivalate things that are not equivalent.
Yep.
But
there's
a difference in quantity and kind. Let me give you one example. Right. So I looked this up, during President Trump's first term in office, by whoever was recording this, he apparently made 30,573 lies, which averages 21 per day.
Which is impressive.
That's impressive.
Right? That is impressive, right? So we could talk all day long about all the lying that President Trump does, right? If we have that conversation and then I say, Biden lied too.
Right.
Yes.
That's a fact. President Biden did lie, but that doesn't mean he lied as much. But pointing out that he lied, and frankly, some of his lies and that of his administration were
significant.
Like about his health and ability to run for office again, all that. he didn't lie nearly as much as President Trump did. It doesn't mean he didn't lie. Mm-hmm. So just acknowledging that President Biden lied is not making it equivalent, but it is saying both sides are guilty of lying, even if one did it far more than the other.
And this is where I think part of what's going on is your motivation for for saying something about the other side doing this also. If your motivation for saying, well, Biden lied is to say all politicians lie, Trump's no different from any other politician, they all lie, they all do this, that's unhelpful because you're minimizing that part of what that statistic is showing is like an extraordinary amount of lying and a character flaw, I think. If what you're trying to do is say, well, Biden also lied, it's important to remember he wasn't perfect and that serves some goal. Or just to say one side or the other is not where all evil or all goodness lies.
Right.
That's a really good reason to say, well, Biden also lied. If you're using that to say the pressures of being in that particular kind of office can lead to these kinds of temptations, and this does often happen because you're trying to get your agenda done or you're trying to cover up something that you had to cut a corner to get accomplished, that can be really useful. But if you're doing it to say, actually what Trump did isn't that bad or special or important, then I think that can qualify as both-sidesism.
Another example of this beyond the lying is the abuse of the pardon power. President Trump, I think, severely abused the pardon power when he pardoned all the January 6th rioters, both those who were guilty of trespassing and those who were guilty of assaulting police officers, right? Like they were all pardoned. I think it's important in that conversation to acknowledge that President Biden, I think, severely abused the pardon power when he gave blanket pardons to his own family members. Are they equal? I don't know. We could adjudicate whose abuse is worse. Yeah. But if you only talk about the way one side abuses power, the assumption can be, well, the other side must be good, or the other side must be clean, or the other side must be innocent. And in a lot of these issues, it's not that. You can say one is worse. It doesn't mean the other is good. Right. It just means it's slightly less bad. And I don't want to get into that game of constantly having to adjudicate exactly who's where on the scale, when in some cases, in some conversation, I want to acknowledge that neither of these are righteous or good or ought to be celebrated.
Right. And the other thing that I don't think we realize can happen when you're scared of both-sidesism, I've been in a conversation with someone maybe a year or two ago who was frustrated with a mutual friend of ours who does a lot of, faith and politics kind of work publicly. And they were saying they were so frustrated during the Biden administration that this person was critical of Biden because this is someone who's, leans Democratic, has been really critical of Trump. And this friend of mine was just like, we can't afford for you to be critical of Biden right now when Trump is so bad.
Right.
And it's like when you're trying to avoid both-sidesism, you can slide into this place of what we've talked about before on the show, like the stakes are too high right now to acknowledge any wrongdoing on the other side. And I think this person would have said, because it's so unequal, what they've done wrong versus the other side has done wrong, I'm avoiding both-sidesism by saying, like, let's just not talk about the evils on this side because the stakes are really high and these are so much greater. And that's how you end up like justifying a lot of things that shouldn't be justified. That's how you end up telling the party or the politician you're supporting, you can get away with whatever you want and I'll find a way to justify it because I think this other risk over here is so much worse.
I've got a true story. Amanda and I had a long weekend getaway planned for Cape Cod this summer with some friends. She told me weeks beforehand that I needed to get some new clothes for the trip, but I totally forgot. Then, just the day before we left, a new sponsor to this podcast called Poncho sent me 3 of their shirts to try. So I took them with me to Cape Cod, and I'm not kidding, they are my new favorite shirts. I don't know what kind of fabric they use, but it just feels great. These shirts are seriously comfortable, and they stay cool in the heat. They breathe, and they look fantastic. Here's the best part. They are truly all-day shirts. I wore one of my Poncho shirts all day while hiking around Martha's Vineyard in shorts, and then in the evening, I just threw on some pants and wore the same shirt out to a very fancy dinner. Poncho shirts can dress up or dress down depending on whatever you're doing. And every one is backed by the Poncho Promise. Free shipping and free returns, free exchanges to make sure you get just the right fit. They have a whole bunch of different styles, the original, the Western, denim, and ultralight. You can get them in short or long sleeves, regular or slim fit, and in a ton of colors and patterns. So if you've been looking for the perfect shirt, something breathable that fits great, feels even better, and stands out in a good way, give Poncho a try. Go to ponchooutdoors.com/holypost for a $10 off coupon on your first order. That's Poncho Outdoors, PONCHO outdoors.com/holypost for $10 off and free shipping. And thanks to Poncho for my vacation shirts and for sponsoring this episode.
Holy Post is sponsored by Sundays for Dogs. I got a dog, you got a dog, all God's children got dogs. When we get to heaven, gonna feed our dogs real high-quality dog food. But you don't have to wait to heaven, you can start now with Sundays Food for Dogs. Sundays Food for Dogs was founded by a veterinarian and mom, Dr. Tori Waxman, who got tired of seeing so-called premium dog food full of fillers and synthetics. Sundays is air-dried, real food made in a human-grade kitchen. Every bite of Sundays is real meat, fruit, and veggies with no kibble, whatever that is, and just scoop and serve. Unlike other real food dog food, Sundays doesn't have to be refrigerated. Just real food made with care for the dog you love. Make the switch to Sundays. Go right now to sundaysfordogs.com/holypost and get 40% off your first order. Or you can use code HOLYPOST at checkout. That's 40% off your first order at sundaysfordogs.com/holypost. sundaysfordogs.com/holypost. Or use code HOLYPOST at checkout.
Mike,
Yes.
you have actual comments from listeners.
I do. So, I mean, it's funny, like you guys already kind of jumped the horse and are getting into some of this. And can I just say to our listeners, our lovely listeners, I love you all. But if I had a hill to die on, it would be you should not comment on an episode before you have finished the episode. So maybe, and it could already be too late because I think you've already said things that people are probably disagreeing with and are upset about.
Sure.
But this is a conversation that requires a lot of nuance. So maybe just wait till the end and then let us know what you think. So here's comment number 1. I truly love this podcast. We're just going to stop.
Thank you
there.
so much.
Me
Enough
too.
said.
I truly love this podcast. You all have been a balm to my soul for the past 5 years. Now that we are getting into the second go around with the far right, can we please strike, quote, but there are problems on both sides from our vocabulary. From our vocabulary. It is a false equivalency and needs to stop. Do Dems have issues? Most sure. But on their worst day, the problems on the left are nowhere near what the right is coming up with.
Yeah. There it is, the equivalency. There's an assumption that by acknowledging problems on the left, we are making them equal to the problems on the right. I don't agree with that at all. I don't think acknowledging the existence of severe problems on the left means we're making them equal to whatever the moment is happening on the right. There are some cases where I think there is an equivalence,
Right.
Yeah.
but it depends on the issue. It depends on the problem. But many others, I agree. Right now at this moment with Donald Trump in the White House, and goodness, does anyone listen to the show think I'm a fan of Donald Trump or trying to be an apologist for him? I absolutely think he's a cancer on our government and in our society. I think I have not voted for him. I never would vote for him. We get more criticism. I mean, goodness, we're basically a reoccurring segment on woke preacher clips for not being right wing enough, right?
Yeah.
And criticizing MAGA and things like that. So I don't think anyone thinks that. But I am not here to be an apologist for the left either.
Yeah.
And when the left does things that are wrong, when they are harmful, or more importantly, as a Christian and as trying to advocate for others to be faithful Christians, when the left deviates from the way of Jesus, I feel the need to acknowledge that and speak up to it because I don't want anyone to hear my critique of MAGA or Trump and assume, well, then the Christian answer is to be a Democrat. In certain cases, it may be, but I'm not going to universalize that endorsement. I just think that's silly. So, I'm going to acknowledge where the Dems have issues because I don't want people thinking that's the only faithful way to be a believer.
And I think that's important too, what we're trying to do when we say something like there are problems on both sides. Because even the way this comment phrases it, there's sort of like a tone of like, oh, but there are problems on both sides is something we do either just because we feel like we have to say that, which isn't true. There are times when it's like, well, no, this is a problem just on one side or the other. And we've even talked before about even if it can exist on both sides, are there certain tendencies on the right and on the left that look different? Sure, and we can say that. Or sometimes I think people think we're saying, but there are problems on both sides because we don't want to offend anyone. Like if we
Right.
say something bad about the right, then we have to say something bad about the left just so that the right doesn't get upset with us. And I think it's important to say most of the time that we have done something like there are problems on both sides. It's been along the lines of what you're saying, Skye, of like, don't just jump over to the other side because you've done that. Or sometimes I think it's like this is a deeply Christian belief to say that there is no clear divide politically between like the clear good and the clear evil, that history is ambiguous, that there's great possibilities of good and great possibilities of evil in every institution, in every person. Like we simultaneously believe in the fallenness of all humans and the effects of the corruption of the fall on all institutions and communities, and on the possibility that the Holy Spirit will work in surprising ways in all institutions and communities and individuals. So there's something just deeply Christian about always having this impulse to say, I don't want to accidentally communicate there's an obvious good and an obvious evil, and let's just all pat ourselves on the back that we're part of the obvious good.
Right. It's that, I mean, back in, was it 16 or maybe 20, one of the people that was in our feeds a lot was Eric Metaxas, who is obviously very MAGA, very Trumpy. Yeah. And one of the arguments he gave all the time for why he supported Donald Trump was, well, it's a binary choice. It's just Trump or Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
And I don't like Trump for X, Y, and Z reasons, but I have to vote for him because the only other option is Hillary Clinton. And I think there's some people who hold that dichotomy in a lot of things. And they go, look, it's either MAGA or it's the Democrats. So stop criticizing the Democrats because MAGA is so terrible.
Yep.
And you just have to go in with the Democrats because MAGA is so bad. And I refuse to buy into that argument, whether it's voting for a particular candidate or endorsing a right-left argument. I hate that way of thinking. I find it to be unfaithful for a Christian to argue that way.
Can we address, I think, Kaitlyn, you said it, and I think it's an easy one for us to address. One of the comments was someone critiquing us for doing this, and then they wondered if we both sides things to placate sensitive conservative ears. And part of me wants to be like, I don't know how you could listen to the majority of our stuff and think we care about placating conservative ears. Like we're pretty strong in our critique of that. And so I see that one come up just enough that I kind of want to put it to bed that obviously we are, John talks about this, kind of why we have set up just even our funding model, the way we have set it up is so that we can speak what we believe to be true and not worry about losing donors or stepping on toes. Skye, could you speak more to that?
I mean, not to go off on a tangent here, but if our primary goal was to make as much revenue as possible, to build as large an audience as possible, to get as much advertising revenue as possible, then we wouldn't just be worried about offending MAGA people. We would be wholeheartedly going after them and trying to bring them into the fold. There's far more Christian audience on the far right than there is in the middle or on the left. So no, we are not worried about offending people on the right. What I find more interesting, and you guys can tell me if you think I'm right or wrong on this, I think over the past going back even further, prior to 2020, some people found the HOLYPOST because they were looking for a Christian voice, a Christian outlet that hadn't drunk the MAGA Kool-Aid. And they found me and Phil back then, and then later you came along, Kaitlyn. They found us and they're like, oh, thank goodness. There's some people who are willing to acknowledge what's really bonkers about Christians going after Trump and MAGA and all that. But then they listened long enough and they were a little weirded out by the fact that we weren't as progressive as they thought we were. And that we weren't throwing our lot in completely with the Democratic Party. Yeah. And then those people got angry at us for not, and this President Obama said something about this years ago, I think while he was still in office. He talks about how people go to news networks now, not looking for information, but looking for affirmation. And to be fair, I think there's a segment of our audience that comes to us looking for affirmation. And I hope they find that in the things that are consistent with the way of Jesus.
Right.
But if they're looking for affirmation with a political ideology, they're going to be constantly frustrated with us because we are not here to affirm the MAGA right or the progressive left, because there are elements of both that we think are really off track. And when we say that, because our audience isn't MAGA primarily and does skew more centrist or progressive, those are more often the angry voices we hear from these days.
Yeah, and you're obviously right, Skye, that demographically, if we wanted to just like go all in on the like MAGA Christian world, there's a bigger audience there. But there's also, in my experience, like a bigger audience if you're just going to go on the full, like, we are anti the kind of conservative Christianity that all three of us have lived in for most of our lives. Like, if we were going to be fully the like progressive deconstructionist show, there's like an easy market for that. And it's not just about size, it's about avoiding negative comments. Like, if we really were in the business of just like trying to not offend our audience, we would pick a firmer lane to be in and just live there. And it is actually much harder. Part of the reason we get both sides comments is because we are recognizing that there are failures across the political spectrum. There are theological failures in all sorts of areas of the church. And it's not that we are this like unbiased observer of all of it that can pass perfect judgment. I think sometimes that's what the both-sidism criticism is like, you think you're above all of this. And I think we're trying to be honest about where we come from and the biases we have. But it would be a lot easier if we just decided to throw our lot in with one side or the other and just say, whether it's political leaders or the biggest kind of theological hotshots in that part of the church, we're with them 100%. That would be the path to avoiding offending anyone in our audience.
See, everyone, we're just right. I think that's what you should take away from this. No, we talk a lot internally about trying to be humble and holding opinions loosely, and I just think and we talk a lot about how we don't want to be bundled into one side or the other. But all right, this one comes up all the time, and we've talked about it. Let's address it some more. But the other side is just so bad. So this one, we have one party that is wildly unchristian, anti-immigrant, anti-refugee, anti-poor people, anti-empathy, anti-education, and one party that isn't pro-life enough for Christians when it comes to abortion.
Okay. Wow.
So I think there's just this idea like, yes, both sides get it wrong. Sure. And I'm not all in on the Democrats, but the Republicans are just so bad right now in so many ways that are the way of Christ. There's just not the time to talk about how bad the Democrats are. We need to have a united front here.
Yeah. This is like, imagine somebody choking in a restaurant and you're like, obviously their airway is obstructed. They need immediate help, Heimlich, whatever. We got to clear their airway, and ignore the fact that there's, I don't know, an 80-pound wolf chewing on their leg. Like, the immediate thing is clearing their airway, but you got to deal with the dog chewing on their leg too. Like, this is a problem. And I feel like what they're saying is, well, someone's choking and you're upset about a gerbil gnawing on their toe. It's like, no, there are real insidious problems on the left as well. I agree. They are not the imminent threat to the republic that we're seeing on the MAGA right. But that doesn't mean I'm going to minimize them. And I'm sorry. It's not simply that the left is not as nuanced on abortion as I would like them to be. They're not. That is an issue, but that is by far not the only issue I have with the left. Right. So even the question itself is a wonderful example of somebody who I think, even if you agree with their assessment of the problems on the right, their minimization of the problems on the left is indicative of somebody who is not viewing the left in even attempting to be objective.
I also think it's important, the end of this comment that you didn't read, Mike, says, but we should at least be able to differentiate between parties. And that is true. Like, this is what we've already said, is like, we don't want to be accused of the kind of both-sidism that acts as if because there are faults on both sides, it's all equal. Like, that's a very good point. But the other problem here, besides what you said, Skye, is we have this tendency, and it harms our relationships. It makes it harder for us to do politics well, to just sort of group everyone together. Like, even this description, it's not just that one party is, in this person's estimation, wholeheartedly evil and the other is like sort of bad, which I would disagree with that assessment as well. But also, when we say things like there are problems on both sides, we're not always thinking just of the Democratic Party leadership or the Republican Party leadership. And this comment makes it sound like, well, because I can find unchristian, anti-immigrant, anti-refugee, anti-poor people, anti-empathy, anti-education things in the Republican Party, the lot as a whole is just irredeemably all of those things. And I think part of what we are trying to do when we try to nuance some of those statements is not just to say there's failures on this other side too, but to say there are failures in different people, in different institutions, and you can't just kind of lump that all into the Republican Party. One of the things that I find a lot of concern of in our episodes is saying we need to be able to call out what the Republican Party leadership is doing, that is all of these awful things. We need to be able to say that policy is egregious. That comment was cruel. The way you're treating people is wrong. And also say there are a lot of people that work for the Republican Party, that vote for the Republican Party, that post things on Facebook about the Republican Party that are not all of those awful things. And they either like other things that I don't think are as valuable, or they're listening to different news than I'm listening to. They're not seeing some of the problems I'm seeing. And part of my reticence to kind of go along with this commenter and saying, well, there's this evil party and there's this like kind of imperfect party, is just to say that those are both parties and ideologies made up of lots of different people who have different ideas and different character traits and different ways that they would vote. And it's a coalition. And as a whole, I want to say, in general, you talk about immigrants in ways that are horrible, and we need to address that. But I don't want to say just everyone can be lumped into this and they're irredeemably evil.
Well said. I don't want to get into a list of problems on the left. For the same reason,
we could talk about it.
We could talk about it. But one of my concerns, I don't know if I already said this or not, but like one of the reasons we tend to critique the right more, especially the MAGA right and Trump, is because that's where the tradition of the church that we all hail from has been more captured by.
Yep.
Right. There's a lot more political idolatry within evangelicalism on the Republican right than there is on the left. So that's been the focus of a lot of our critique. The problem with that is some people who listen to us do that, if we don't say anything else, may draw the conclusion that, okay, well, then to be a faithful Christian,
right,
I need to throw my lot in with the left. And that's not what we're advocating.
Mm-hmm.
What we're advocating for is we all need to throw our lot in with Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And political idolatry on the left, whenever it occurs, is just as problematic as political idolatry on the right. Now, there's a much greater magnitude of it on the right now. But if you, the individual listener, decide, well, I'm going to be politically idolatrous on the left, it's just as terrible for you to do that as it would be for you to do it on the right. So I don't want anyone to hear me say all these critical things about MAGA and not hear me say, but hold on, be careful on the left too, because you can make an idol out of that political ideology, which is also not in full conformity with the way of Jesus.
And it's instructive to look at the history of the Republican Party and Christians' relationship to it. Like we talked a lot, closer to 2020 and 2024 about how some of this story is a story in which this idolatry is built over time. The level of loyalty that is demanded of Christians increases over time. And then you get in a position where maybe when you first sort of like tentatively threw your lot in, there were some bad things, there were some good things, but there was a lot of good and you agreed with a lot. And then by the time your loyalty is at this really high level and you're being asked to sacrifice things that shouldn't be sacrificed, the things that you knew were sort of bad at the beginning, but were not a huge deal, have now become huge deals. Mm-hmm. And I can't know what will happen politically in the next 25, 50 years. But part of my concern that people not think, oh, I'll just replicate my relationship with the Republican Party on the left is because right now it might be, there's some things I don't love, but it really is not politically expedient for me to comment on them. And also, I'm holding it all loosely and it's a coalition and I agree with them, but I'm not. But over time, if you're not cautious, if you're not like really thinking critically, you can end up in a similar position where you've become very loyal and those things that were not a big deal in the beginning have now become huge, great.
Can I give you an example of that in operation?
Yes.
I'm sure you remember it wasn't that long ago that one of the huge issues on the right was how the left shut down free speech. Right? The cancel culture on the left. And you can't go on college campuses and say the things that need to be said. And that crazy guy Milo, whatever his name was.
Nope, that's an actor.
Big Greek name.
What am I thinking? Yeah.
Yiannopoulos or whatever his name was.
The like actor.
Was getting shut down on college campuses. So the right made it its mission to say, we are for free speech because the left is for cancel culture and not for free speech. That was and so a lot of people who were against what the left was doing on speech threw their lot in with the right. Well, look at where we are now. Who is shutting down free speech? It's MAGA and the right who are saying, we're going to sick the Justice Department on you if you don't say the right things about the right, and everything's now hate speech. And the people defending that are the very people who a couple of years ago were saying, no, we're for free speech. But because their partisan ideology came first, they're excusing the very thing that they demonized on the other side. So I don't want to be responsible for somebody appropriately recognizing abuses on the right, going, all right, then I'm throwing my lot in with the left. And then when the left starts doing those abuses or others, they don't recognize it because they bought into the idea that, well, the godly position is on the left. And that's just where I'm going to be.
Totally.
I think we need to call it out wherever we see it, even if they're happening in different magnitudes.
Yeah. So you're trying to say that you're going to call it out. And just because you call it out on both sides, you're not actually equating the two sides. I think all of us would say, you had something you were going to say.
I mean, going back to the lying thing, both presidents lied. I think Donald Trump does it infinitely more. It doesn't mean it's excusable when Joe Biden did it.
Right.
Right.
HOLYPOST is sponsored by the Life Application Study Bible. The Bible is meant to be so much more than just head knowledge. If we leave it there, we miss out on fully experiencing God's transformational word. Instead, Scripture should flow through everything we do, from reading and studying to understanding to letting it influence every aspect of our lives. Crafted by dedicated scholars and pastors, the Life Application Study Bible is filled with thousands of study notes, articles, charts, profiles, and more. The features teem with historical information, cultural context, and tenets of the Christian faith. But they don't stop there. They go deeper so you can understand why Scripture matters and how it applies to your life today. The Life Application Study Bible lets you experience the life-changing power of Scripture in everyday contexts so you can deepen your connection with God and be inspired to live transformed through a growing relationship with Christ. Learn more at lifeapplication.com. That's lifeapplication.com. This episode is sponsored by Glorify, the #1 Christian Daily Devotional App. Don't know if you knew this, but May is Mental Health Awareness Month. There are a lot of little things you can do to improve your mental health this year, and the Glorify app is a great place to start. From guided meditations that reduce stress to courses on overcoming anxiety, and all grounded in Scripture. Mental wellness starts with small habits, and Glorify's daily devotionals are a simple way to center your heart and mind in God's peace every single day. Whether you're a committed Christian or simply curious about faith, the Glorify app has something for you. Join over 20 million people who have downloaded the Glorify app and deepened their relationship with God. Visit glorify-app.com/holypost right now to download the Glorify app for free. That's glorify-app.com/holypost to download the Glorify app for free. glorify-app.com/holypost.
And so I think like another common critique we get is we will often say, we will refer to the far left, and I will see comments all the time. There's no such thing as the far left. Skye.
I defer to Kaitlyn here because she's got great stories from her time at Duke.
And I do just wanted to say, like, I think like I will see comments like, well, Skye and Kaitlyn must not know yada, yada, yada. And I'll read those. And I'm like, I don't know you guys super well, but I know you pretty well. And I'll think to myself like, oh, actually Skye and Kaitlyn are familiar with that. They do know about that. And so there is this both like it's like you all may like the listeners may agree with you both. And that's fine. That's good. That's healthy to some extent. But I think sometimes there's just this assumption that you must not have thought about the thing that I've thought about. And I've been with you too long enough to know like, oh, you're extremely thoughtful. I can almost guarantee you've given it some thought. You've just come to a different conclusion on it. And that I think sometimes that people who are friendly to the left, but are kind of new, who are maybe grew up conservative, are not fully aware of the different degrees of leftness out there. Kaitlyn?
Totally. I don't think I've ever said this on the Holy Post before, but some of my friends at Duke who similarly to me came to Duke from pretty conservative evangelical environments. And what I'm about to say about my own experience does not mean that like I have perfect judgment on all of this because I've seen all sides. But I do have the unique experience of having had in total 9 years in pretty conservative Christian higher ed at Liberty University and at Dallas Theological Seminary, and then went to Duke, not only in the divinity school, which is a pretty progressive, for evangelicals, divinity school, but I spent a lot of my time in my coursework not in the divinity school, in big Duke grad school. Those are polar opposite different worlds. But I have a lot of friends at Duke who had that same experience. They went to Wheaton for undergrad before they went to Duke, or they went to Baylor and they came to Duke. And a lot of us will describe the same experience that we have started calling the second slap, which is you grew up in a conservative environment and you thought, we're the people who care about scripture, we're the people who are loving, we're the people who want to be like Jesus. And then the first slap was maybe in 2016 lead up or maybe in 2020, and you went, oh my goodness, no, these people that I thought we were like the white hats, the good guys, we're actually not. And then you jump over to this other community of more progressive Christians and you think, no, these are the people who are really reading the Bible, who really care about what Jesus said, who are truly compassionate. And at some point along there, you realize that you're ostracized for having any opinion that differs from them. A lot of the rhetoric is just as fundamentalist, just with different political values. It can be just as prone to say the stakes are too high to turn the other cheek, you got to fight back. And that's the second slap is like, okay, wait, I thought I had left the community I thought was good and was bad. Now I'm in the community that I know is the good guys, and actually they're not. And I think when you haven't had that experience and you're still and I think a lot of our listeners are like mostly still in conservative institutions or churches or families, and they're not in the real more left-leaning conversations, communities, institutions. They're only seeing them from the outside, and they seem really good from the outside. And I think once you're really in them, you see, one, that fundamentalism, as you've talked about, Skye, like can exist across the political spectrum. At Duke, I just would laugh often at the divinity school. People would tell me, oh, you came from Dallas Seminary, where there are certain theological positions that you just couldn't talk about on campus. And I was like, yeah, kind of like here. Yeah. There are theological positions that are just like anathema that you're not allowed to say. And in Big Duke, there are all sorts of positions on sexuality, positions on religion that would have just been completely, there's free speech to say them, but you would get canceled for sure for voicing them. I took a gender studies class that I've talked about a bunch that if my seminary professors had like given me their worst nightmares for what like progressive academia was saying, it would not be actually as wild as what I
And you
heard
wouldn't
in
have
that
believed
class.
it.
I wouldn't have believed it. I would have been like, these crazy conservatives went down a rabbit hole on YouTube that told them the liberals think these crazy things about pedophilia and sexual abuse and whatever, and they don't actually believe that stuff. And then I sat in a classroom where not everyone believed that, but we read stuff that was supportive of those kinds of things, and we were supposed to treat it as like a pretty good idea. And so I just think once you've actually had that experience of either going, no, there are some ideas on the other end of the spectrum that can go really far, but also it can be just as fundamentalist, it can be just as prone to violence, as we've talked about. It helps you, I think, moderate a little bit. And it's true on the other end too. I mean, I think some of the people I encountered in really left-leaning spaces in Durham, they had no idea that it was possible to show up to my really conservative church in Dallas, Texas, and find someone who actually like wanted to care about immigrants. But that was true. The church as a whole believed things that I really have come to disagree with. But on their end, they just like couldn't understand. They didn't have an accurate portrayal of this community, and I didn't have an accurate portrayal of them either, good or bad. Like I didn't realize there were people in my conservative seminary that would have said, oh, there's no one good in a godless place like Duke. That's not true. There were wonderful, lovely people. They also didn't know how extreme some of this stuff could be over. Like both things are true. Yeah. And our internet echo chambers make it really hard. Not only, we've mostly talked about it in terms of everyone's just affirming, like you said about media consumption, everyone's just affirming what I already believe. Some of the challenge too is that like you also don't know some of what's really wrong on the other side.
I think because of your educational pedigree, right? From Liberty to Duke to Dallas to Duke, like you've seen the spectrum.
Yeah.
And a little bit because of my education, I went to a large state university, but more so because of my family background, just the diversity of my family background. I have seen people on the left who are just as fundamentalist as some of the Christians I've met on the right. And if people want to know what gets me animated, it's illiberalism. And I don't care where I see it. And I've seen a lot of it on the left. And that's why I know a lot of people listening are coming out of Christian evangelical environments where they've seen the abuses of fundamentalism and the absolutism and shutting down people who think differently or question things or who have, terribly closed-minded views about this, that, or the other. And they reject it. And they think, well, the other side must be better. And you and I are both kind of saying, you can try it. But you'll find kooks on the other side, and this is my both-sidism thing. They are there too, because human beings are human beings.
Yes.
And there's a certain personality trait that some people possess that demands fundamentalism.
Yep.
And I am much more comfortable with somebody who's more conservative than me, or maybe more progressive than me, who's curious, who's hospitable, who's genuinely trying to follow the way of Jesus imperfectly and improving it when they have to. But there are plenty of people on the other side that don't have those qualities. So rather than painting with these categories of left and right or MAGA versus woke or whatever names you want to use, I want to talk about liberal or illiberal. I want to talk about centered on Jesus versus centered on some other ideology or idolatry.
Yeah.
And that's what gets me going. So when I say, well, the other side does this too, what I'm trying to acknowledge is that quality is not non-existent on the other side. So don't pretend that it is.
Right. And I think people who were formed in environments that demanded that kind of conformity or that kind of fundamentalism. So, if you grew up in a church or in a family that acted like we are the good guys and the other side is stupid and evil, you have to be so much more cautious, I think, when you are adjusting your political, your theological views, that you don't discard some of the things that were wrong, but keep some of the worst parts, actually, which was just this posture of not being curious, not being humble, being so certain that and part of it is this good desire for moral purity. I think people are just looking to know, if I believe the right things, if I belong to the right kind of community, I can do good in a world that feels really evil and really scary. And that's a good desire. But part of the challenge of the Christian message is just it's all God's grace. And also, before Christ's return, you're not achieving that. And actually, most Christian attempts to achieve absolute moral purity before Christ's return are what cause so much violence and destruction and fundamentalism, because you can't achieve that, in part because it always is an attempt to achieve that with your own effort, being the one that creates it. And that will never go well for you.
Yeah, I know personally someone who grew up in a conservative town, small town, and probably had some fundamentalists in me. When I went through the first slap, essentially what happened, and I think this is a very common experience, is I abandoned my fundamentalist conservative evangelicalism, but I kept the fundamental part.
Yeah.
I was still a fundamentalist, but just now I was on the other side. And it took a while for me to realize actually it's the fundamentalism part is the problem. It's not whatever camp that I currently find myself more in line with, but it's when I see the world in such black and white. I have a very good friend who we will talk about this at times. And I finally got him to admit, after years where we were talking, and he didn't realize he said it, but it just came out because it was so instinctive within him that we were talking about something, what I would argue is very, very complicated. And he's just I just think things are mostly simple and black and white.
Yeah.
And it was 3 years ago, he would not have said that about the world, but he has just gone so far on the other side that now everything's black and white again, just like it was when he was in high school.
Yeah.
He's just on a different political side now.
Yeah, David French has talked a lot about how fundamentalism is not what you believe, it's how you believe it. And that's what I'm allergic to. So, it's a very prevalent problem.
Yeah.
Do you have another reader comment, or can we go on to something?
Let's go on to something.
Okay, so one thing that's on my mind that I think relates to this, which is happening right now, I was watching videos this morning about it. There's this argument that's happening in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination about which side is more violent or which side is violent at all. And the left is saying, no. There's all this evidence that the political violence is much more prevalent on the right. And the Department of Justice deleted evidence that shows it's all on the right, blah, blah, blah. And then you have, of course, the MAGA right going, are you kidding me? Charlie Kirk was assassinated by somebody with leftist ideas. And, Donald Trump had 2 assassination attempts. It's the left that is politically violent. And it's it's just disgusting to me that they're all arguing about, no, you're the violent one, not. And what came to mind is Elizabeth Newman, who has been on the show before. We've done some HOLYPOST events with her. She wrote a book called Kingdom of Rage, former Homeland Security personnel, expert in counterterrorism. And I remember having a conversation with her where she said, for many, many, many years, the government was very worried about right-wing extremism and the radicalization that is happening on the right, neo-Nazi groups, KKK, things like that. And there has been a dramatic rise in all of that, as we've seen, January 6th and elsewhere. But she said the last time I was with her, I think it was the Denver event, she said what's concerning her is for the first time ever, they're seeing a dramatic increase in violent threats coming from the left. And I think we're seeing that play out. I think there is clear evidence that the rhetoric on all sides is inflaming unstable people and radicalizing them. And yes, some on the right will be moved to violence, as we've seen the assassinations in Minnesota, we go on down the list. But we're starting to see violent actions happening on the left. And for either side to say, we are not a problem, only you are.
Right.
I mean, this is a classic example of why both-sidism needs to be addressed, because the thing that's feeding the problem is not, it's not coded red or blue.
Mm-hmm.
It's algorithms and rhetoric that gets picked up and spread. And both sides are going to see this increasingly be a problem. It doesn't mean that there's an equal number of radicalized people on one side or the other, but there doesn't need to be. For this to be a huge problem for this country.
And sometimes the motivation behind accusing other people of both-sidism is the kind of fertile ground in which some of that can really grow, because sometimes the motivation is, no, I don't want you to point out that there's anything wrong on my side or anything praiseworthy on the other side.
Right.
Because again, with this moral purity thing, like, it's really convenient for me. It really helps me, bring out more voters. It really helps me, drum up support. It really helps me, get a lot of emotion going to try and motivate some of my political goals, to be like, it's very black and white. It's very simple. There's good and there's evil. And that's not just adjacent to some of the political violence question. It's a precondition. Like, it's shockingly easy for people who are generally opposed to political violence to end up finding themselves justifying it. This is what we've seen over and over and over again, because in this particular circumstance, not only are the stakes so high, the other side is so bad and so irredeemable, and my side is the side that is the virtuous one. And I think I've said on the HOLYPOST like a million times now, this thing from Reinhold Niebuhr, who was writing in the wake of great political violence and tragedy and injustice and, wars and bombs and abuse, and was saying what he was most concerned about was not the people who were self-consciously doing malevolent things, but the people who think they are the unambiguous good guys who can just fix the world, and whatever it costs is whatever it costs. And at the end could justify some really atrocious things because they said our end goal is really good and we are the ones that should be trusted with that kind of power.
Yeah. One way we see this playing out, get away from political violence for a minute, everyone has been talking about the attempt in Texas to redraw the districts in order to give the Republicans more districts in the upcoming midterm elections. I think that's wrong. I think it's problematic. I think it's a bad move. What is Gavin Newsom doing in California? They're trying to redraw the districts in California to mitigate what's happening in Texas. At the same time that the Democrats are doing that in California, Pete Buttigieg has gone back to his home state of Indiana to try to stop the redistricting in Indiana because it's a red state. So the Democrats simultaneously are saying, we want redistricting in California because it'll help us. We don't want redistricting in Indiana because it would hurt us, rather than taking the principled position of partisan gerrymandering and redistricting in the middle of a decade when it normally happens after the census
is bad.
It's just bad. It's universally bad. So there's a case of, well, the Republicans in Texas are doing something bad, so we are justified in doing something bad to stop their bad. And it's like, no, this is the kind of absurdity that we're trying to prevent here. So there is both-sidism happening. Or look at the filibuster in the Senate and what happened with Harry Reid removed the filibuster for judicial appointments back in 2013. He's a Democratic leader in the Senate. And then the Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, removed the filibuster for Supreme Court justices in 2017. And, the whole judiciary has now become more and more partisan. And you can always say, well, they started it. Say, well, no, it's just bad. It's a bad idea. And the fact that one side started it or the other is irrelevant at this point when all of us as Americans are getting hurt by it.
Right. Can I do a really uncharacteristic thing and make a movie reference?
Wow.
Whoa.
I recently watched all of the Lord of the Rings movies. Which
Extended-
Mike is unhappy about,
extended editions?
not the extended editions. We're going to get to that later, but we started with the regular
Partial
ones.
credit.
So, but what I was so struck by, as someone who I just referenced Niebuhr, alive around the same time as Tolkien, I just kept wondering, like, is part of, like, there's just were so many Niberian themes, I thought. In particular, this idea that, like, there are characters, and I'm not going to remember the names, and you can give more detail if you think it's necessary. But I was so struck by the fact that there are characters who are aware that this, like, great power in the ring, is there another word for it?
No,
Is there
it's
just
a
the
ring.
ring? Just no, I mean, is there a name for it?
No.
Okay. The ring.
Yes.
They're aware that there's all this great power and that it seems to, like, corrupt people, but there are still people in the story that are like, yeah, but we need it. And, like, I'm the good guy and I'm fighting against evil, so I should be able to use this against evil.
Right.
And yes, it has this risk of corruption, but, like, I'm a good guy, so it won't hurt me. And the whole time I was like, I just wonder if, like, there was any overlap between these two thinkers, because that's so how Niebuhr also described the experience that Tolkien also had of witnessing all this great evil in a world war, was to say part of what's going on here is not just evil people doing evil things. It's good people thinking, I can use a nuclear bomb, or I can use this ring, or I can use whatever for the sake of something good, and missing the fact that as a fallen human, it will corrupt me anyway.
Totally.
I want to talk about one last topic related to this, and it has to do with credibility. And so, but to read a comment here first. I thought this comment was so good. It was so gracious, trying to say this in humility and love and hoping I can receive gentle correction if I'm off base. But it seems like the Both-Sidesism in weekly episodes has been pretty blatant lately. And she lists some examples of the horrible things happening with MAGA, and Skye always seems to throw in, this is a big problem.
It's your fault.
It's me.
She goes, it's just beginning to feel like comparing the dangers of a small campfire to a destructive forest fire. I like that illustration. The issue with it is that, well, sometimes forest fires start from campfires. And so I think, like, correct me if I'm wrong, to some extent what we're saying is that we think when we call out issues on both sides, even if one is a campfire and one is a forest fire, we are trying to, one, earn some credibility with either side of, like, we're not just fanboys and girls of a particular side. And we think that by calling out both sides, hopefully it allows us to engage in better credibility, better discussion with people who might disagree with us, but they're more willing to have a conversation. But two, it's like some of those things that you think are small now, well, eventually the left's going to be in power again. And then what happens when that campfire grows and grows and grows? And what do we do then? So can we talk a little bit about, I don't know if you have anything to say about the campfire metaphor, but even just like this idea of credibility and why we think that's a big reason why we do this.
To really overextend the metaphor, I think it's a little short-sighted to forget that part of what led to MAGA, the forest fire of MAGA, was the failures and abuses of the left. Yeah. And the metaphor I would use is, okay, the left was a campfire. Maybe the campfire got a little bit out of control. And MAGA came along, or the right came along at the time, and said, in order to stop the spread of that little fire, we need to do a controlled burn.
Yep.
And the controlled burn, unfortunately, has gotten out of control.
Not controlled.
It's not controlled anymore. But now the left is saying, hey, that forest fire is a huge problem, and we're justified, and we need to pay all attention to that. And you're right, we're ignoring this little one over here, which is going to be the next forest fire. I feel like my calling and responsibility, and I would extend this to the HOLYPOST media company in general, is not to say you should be in favor of this fire or that fire. We're calling people to faithfulness to Jesus.
Yeah. Period.
And if that comes across as both-sidism sometime, I'm willing to take the slings and arrows for that, because it's just not worth it to me. We're not solving the real problem if we're not calling people back, if you're a follower of Jesus, to following Jesus. And we could go down, maybe we will, go down some of the issues that we don't talk enough about on the left that I think are problematic, and why I won't throw my lot in there either. But yes, there is a raging forest fire, and it's bad. And the right now, with all of its power and the presidency and the things it's trying to do, are terrible, and it needs to be dealt with. But I don't think the way you deal with it is by giving carte blanche authority to the left.
Yeah. I saw someone, a like kind of loose friend of mine, who was posting on Instagram a couple days ago about how lonely she was, because she was like, in the wake of the Charlie Kirk assassination, she was like, I don't think he was evil and deserved to die. I also don't think he was this like Christian saint that stood for everything good and was gunned down for it. And it's really lonely here in this world where I want to say this is a tragedy and it's awful. And also it's not a sign that we need to take up arms against the left. And she basically was just like, it was very vulnerable for someone who had kind of a significant platform on Instagram to just be like, I don't have a position really other than like, all of this is bad and I feel very alone in it. And she posted later that the number of comments she got that were just like, well, you're lonely because you're wrong. Like you should just pick a side.
Yeah.
And I told her, I was like, I just think that experience of loneliness is what it means to be a Christian, to be able to say like, I'm going to provisionally agree with you on the right or on the left when I think that's faithful. And then I'm going to face the difficulty of like true belonging in our political world requires obedience and like just total agreement. And it will be really lonely to not give that to anyone. On the other hand, you and I have talked a lot about my discomfort with talking about us being in exile. And part of my discomfort with that is that there can be this desire to either say we're in exile or to say I'm looking for a third way, or that is really a denial of any political responsibility that just sort of says like, I'm critiquing both left and right and I don't have anything to say. Like we're in exile and I don't want to get involved. And I think what we're trying to do is say, as different events occur, we want to have a faithful Christian lens on them. And we also want to maintain the ability to say we will pass different judgments depending on the context, depending on what the particular thing is, and not have those judgments predetermined by whatever side we want to live on.
Well said. We have a couple minutes left. Can we run through some, because this is going to be short shrift at this point, but can we run through some of the issues on the left that we don't talk much about that we think are problematic? Yeah. And I get, some people are going to not resonate with these because it's not in their experience. I have college-age kids. Lots of my friends have college-age kids. Some are at Christian schools, some are at state schools or secular schools. I've been on many of these college campuses. I've seen stuff a little bit like what you experienced at Duke in that class, that it was like jaw-dropping. I know sometimes these stories get told on social media or highlighted in MAGA media world, and you think they're crazy. They're
sometimes they're real.
Sometimes they're real. Sometimes they're real. Okay, I already mentioned the free speech, cancel culture stuff, which really grew out of the left and the politically correct speech and all that kind of stuff, and the suppression of free. I think identity politics has been incredibly damaging and very, very prevalent on the left. The irony is a lot of these things are now being taken up by the right. But they were there. The defund the police rhetoric that came out after 2020 and in no way justifying the police shootings that happened or George Floyd or any of those, but the defund the policing, incredibly politically stupid and not compassionate towards communities. And
that's a really good example of how we should say on both sides, there is this tendency to give this like overly simplistic, meme-ifiable policy response. And on the right, there's examples we could give of that. And the left, that's a good example of like, you took a very complicated thing that needs reform and just slapped a really easy answer on it that actually most impoverished, many, people of color communities have been like, don't do that.
I have been to communities, very progressive communities that have largely defunded the police.
Yeah.
I wouldn't send my children there. It's horrible, right? So the people who suffer then are the poor and the people most likely to be victims of crime. Open borders, really stupid and not a compassionate immigration policy, even though they think it is. I think the hypocrisy over the COVID shutdowns, where schools stayed closed too long and they were preventing churches from gathering for worship, but they were fine with protests during 2020 and some of the other stuff.
And some things stayed shut down in part because once the other side said we want them open, it became now we dig our heels in and they must stay shut down.
A big one that is a complicated hairball and a mess that we don't have time to get into is I think the gender ideology and the pathology on the left on this stuff, the toxic masculinity talk, the way that so many young people are being forced to question their gender identities in ways that are just psychologically unhelpful, harmful to children, I think is incredibly dumb and ridiculous. The extremism on abortion, mentioned that already. We've talked about that in a lot of places. I don't even think they're close to being as thoughtful on this issue as progressives in Europe are.
Yes.
am very sympathetic to what's happening to the Palestinians. I do believe it is a genocide. I believe Israel's guilty of war crimes at this point. But the tolerance of anti-Semitism on the left right now is completely inexcusable.
Yeah.
The valorizing of victimhood, which has definitely been copied by the right, sort of horseshoe theory, I think is bad for individuals. It's bad for the country. We go on, but those are some that come to mind on the and I didn't get into particular policies like Ezra Klein and what's his name wrote that book on abundance, talking about how broken blue cities are.
Derek Thompson
and blue states because of the overregulation of a lot of things that are actually interfering.
And those are two progressive people.
Totally progressive people who recognize the shortcomings on their own side. A lot of people will say, well, progressives care more about the poor, care more about immigrants, care more about education. Because in rhetoric, yes. In practice, there's a big NIMBYism problem on the left, right? Not in my backyard kind of thing. And so there's plenty of hypocrisy on that front too. And that's why and we get into other issues like, judicial stuff and shopping around for nationwide stays on court shopping. I already mentioned the redistricting stuff that's going on. So there's lots of stuff that I don't want to just go, if we can just get rid of MAGA and Donald Trump, then we'll be okay. Yeah. Because in a way, the abuses on the left led to the overreaction on the right, which has gotten us to where we are.
Yeah. And I think if you're listening and you're thinking none of those things seem that important compared to stuff on the right, first, not drawing an equivalency.
They're not equivalent.
But two, I just think it's so easy when you have been consuming one stream of news sources to feel the emotion of some of the problems on one side and to not feel the emotion of problems on the other side. Like, I've had conversations with parents of young kids who the questions about gender and sexuality on the left are distressing to them on a level that I'm like, I don't experience that because I don't have kids. I also don't watch news sources that paint that with great emotion. But if you are watching a lot of news sources that paint that with great emotion, or you're having that experience personally, it will feel so much more existential than if you're not. So I just think there's this weird impulse to just kind of, people might hear that list and just go, none of that is that important. It's all inflated. And it depends what you're experiencing, what news source you're listening to. And it does matter. Like, it just because something else, again, might seem more urgent doesn't mean that doesn't matter.
Last point. I have close friends in blue states, even some who are not Christians, who are very progressive in their politics. And they are turning against the Democratic Party. And it's not because they think the Democrats are too weak against Trump.
Right.
They are living in environments where things have gotten so over the top progressive that even they're going, this is insane.
This is wrong. Yeah.
And so if you don't live in one of those places, you may not realize that there's an extremism and an algorithmic black hole that takes you down weirdness on the left too. And I'm not going to be somebody who says, we just need to solve the problem on the right and everything's okay. And the same thing goes theologically to your point at Duke. Like, I am more conservative in my theology for sure. I am not extremely conservative in my theology, but there are wackadoodle ideas on the theological left that I think are incredibly damaging to the Christian faith.
100%.
So, we could go on and on and on about this, but we got to wrap.
We do, and I'm afraid our comment section is now on fire. After the last
it probably is.
I guess, like, Kaitlyn, I'm going to put you on the spot. We can always cut this if you don't have anything.
Okay.
But basically, my takeaway from all of this is we both sides things sometimes because Jesus was not on either side. Any political party that says Jesus, if he was around today, would be a blank is wrong.
Yeah.
You were overseas recently, and you described going to a tomb of several kings or royalty.
Presidents.
Thank you. And there was a Bible verse that you thought was perfectly fitting.
Yeah.
Can you tell our audience what was the Bible verse, and why did you think, oh, this is like the perfect Bible verse to have where you bury dead presidents?
Yeah, I went to see a bunch of dead presidents entombed under a large Catholic church in Ecuador. And the verse that is right near a statue of Jesus where they are buried is, "Given to Caesar what is Caesar, and to God what is God's." And the funny thing is, I think the intention was a little bit of elevating of these presidents. Like, political power is spoken of at least somewhat positively by Jesus. And so but the experience of seeing these like dead presidents, like their bodies are in tombs in front of you, and it's like, given to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. In a certain sense, it relativizes everything, because it just sort of goes like, all of your power, like it says in Isaiah, like all of your power will end up as dirt and ashes, and you will like go down to the depths and face your judgment. But also, in a weird sense, there's like this dignity and value to these government leaders that are being buried there, and said like your political power was not diminished by Jesus or like disregarded by Jesus. It was diminished in the sense that give unto God what is God's is everything. And I think along the lines of the conversation that we're having, what's really important is sometimes we don't recognize that somewhere along the way, as we got further and further into the political party we support or the online community or the ideology, somewhere along the way, they start asking for things that are only ours to give to God. They start asking for us to give to Caesar things that are only God's to ask for. And I think we miss sometimes in that story with Jesus that part of what he's saying is he looks at a coin that has Caesar's image on it. And we know that scripture says that we are God's image. Part of what I think Jesus is saying is like, yes, this authority is legitimate, but what you owe to God is so much greater than just this coin. It is everything. And I think our caution when we get into what people might call both-sidesism is just preventing people from giving things away that they shouldn't give away. And it's not your fault that temptation is really strong. That is the way the world works. You might go in with really good intentions, but what they will ask of you at some point will inevitably be something greater than you can give. And our concern is, are you prepared when that is asked of you to give the right answer or not? And I think if you don't acknowledge the failures on both sides, you're not as prepared to get to the point where someone says, actually, now I'm asking for total loyalty. I'm asking for you to go with us on every single issue. If you haven't been on the lookout for what is wrong there, I think you'll too easily give something that you shouldn't give.
All right, everyone. I don't know if this helped or hurt. I don't know if this is going to clarify where we are or just make people more angry at us. The goal is not to make you like us. The goal is to explain why we do what we do. Both-sidism, you might keep encountering that on our shows. It's not the same as equivalency.
Right.
We are trying to be more nuanced. We're trying to call people to faithfulness to Jesus rather than political idolatry on either side. And if we don't acknowledge problems on both sides, you run that risk. Mm-hmm. So thank you for supporting us. Thanks for being part of the HOLYPOST media community and HOLYPOST Plus. We're grateful for the opportunity to get to do what we do. And even if we frustrate you from time to time, we thank you for sticking around. We'll see you next week. Bye, everyone. Hey, make a sacrifice to the algorithm gods and like and subscribe to this video and our content. It's the only way they will honor us on YouTube.